She found a man dying in an alley, blood pooling beneath an expensive suit, 3 newborn babies crying against his chest. For 20 years, this Korean crime lord had built an empire on fear and violence. Nobody dared to cross him. Nobody even got close, until the night a homeless girl with nothing left to lose stumbled upon his most vulnerable moment. This is the true story of how one woman saved a monster. Not with weapons or wealth, but with a single choice. And I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll never look at power the same way again. This is a story about survival. No, it's about something far more powerful than that. Stay with me. Let me tell you a story about invisibility, sacrifice, and what happens when someone finally decides to care. Welcome to Soul-Woven Stories. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your thoughts on the story and where you are watching from. In the shadows of the city, there was a world most people never saw. Not the world of penthouse suites and luxury cars, though those existed here too. This was the world underneath. The wet pavement. The cardboard shelters. The places where people like Kendra Lawson learned to disappear. At 20 years old, she'd already mastered the art of being invisible. She'd learned it the hard way. Learned that kindness was a weakness. That trust would get you hurt. That men were dangerous, and getting involved was a death sentence. She had one rule that kept her alive: never get involved. Never make eye contact. Never let anyone see you as anything other than a ghost drifting through their world. And for years, that rule had worked perfectly. But then came that Friday night. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the blue neon lights of the alley into liquid streaks across the pavement. Kendra was taking her usual route back to the abandoned warehouse she called home when she saw him. Jae-hyun Kang. Not that she knew his name then. All she saw was a man slumped against a shuttered storefront, his designer suit soaked with rain and something darker. Blood. So much blood. His face was pale, twisted with pain, but his arms were locked around 3 tiny bundles. Newborns. Their cries were barely audible over the rain, soft mewling sounds that pierced through the storm. His eyes found hers. Even through the pain, even through the shock, there was something in that gaze. Not a command. Not a threat. A plea. Desperate. Raw. Animal. Kendra's first instinct was to run. That's what she always did. That's what kept her alive. Her hand tightened on the strap of her worn backpack, her feet already turning away. This wasn't her problem. This man, whoever he was, he had enemies. The expensive suit, the professional hit, the babies he was protecting. This was the kind of trouble that would destroy her. But then one of the infants cried out. A sharp, frightened sound that cut through every wall she'd ever built. She stopped. Kendra Lawson had learned not to trust anyone. Had learned that helping people only brought pain. But as she stood there in that rain-soaked alley, looking at 3 helpless babies cradled against a dying man's chest, she made a choice that would shatter her world. She had no idea she was looking at the most feared crime boss in Korea. Had no idea that the Black Phoenix Syndicate was already searching for him. Had no idea that his second-in-command was preparing to take everything, and would kill anyone who stood in his way. All Kendra knew was that those babies would die if she walked away. So she didn't walk away. She knelt down in the blood and the rain, looked into the eyes of a man she would later learn had ordered countless deaths, and said the first words she'd spoken to another person in weeks. I've got you. It was the moment everything changed. The moment an invisible girl stepped into the light. The moment a ruthless king was forced to trust a stranger. And the moment 3 innocent lives bound together 2 people from completely different worlds. This is their story. Getting a dying man and 3 newborns across 4 blocks of hostile city streets should have been impossible. Kendra had dragged plenty of things through these alleys before, stolen crates, broken furniture, anything that might be useful, but never a 200-pound man bleeding out from a gunshot wound. She worked fast. Used the man's belt as a makeshift tourniquet above the wound in his side, stuffed his expensive silk handkerchief against the hole to slow the bleeding. He was conscious enough to help, barely, using his legs to push while she pulled. The babies she bundled into her backpack, cushioned with her only blanket, praying they wouldn't suffocate before she got them somewhere safe. It took 37 minutes. She counted every one. The warehouse had been abandoned for years, tucked behind a dead-end street that even the police had forgotten about. Kendra had spent months making it livable, sealing the broken windows with plastic, building a small enclosed space in the corner with scavenged plywood. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was hidden. It was safe. Until now. She laid the man on her thin mattress, the only soft surface she owned. His breathing was shallow, ragged. The babies were screaming now, full-throated wails that echoed off the concrete walls. Kendra's hands shook as she lit her camping stove, boiled water in a dented pot, sterilized the sewing needle she kept for repairs. She'd learned basic first aid from a paramedic she'd known years ago, back when she still believed in people. The bullet had gone through clean, missed anything vital, but he'd lost so much blood. She stitched the entry and exit wounds with thread meant for denim, her jaw clenched against the sound of his groans. The babies needed attention next. She checked them over with trembling fingers, 3 boys, identical, maybe 2 days old. Their hospital bracelets were still attached. She read the names through tears she didn't remember starting to cry. Miho. Jiyu. Taeyang. Someone had named them. Someone had loved them enough to write those names down. And now that someone was either dead or gone, leaving these fragile lives in the hands of a homeless girl who could barely keep herself alive. Kendra sat back against the cold wall, 3 crying infants in her lap, a wounded stranger bleeding on her bed, and wondered what the hell she'd just done. The fever hit him on the 2nd day. Kendra woke to the sound of Korean words she couldn't understand, urgent and broken, spilling from the man's lips like prayers. His skin burned under her palm when she checked his forehead. The wound had become infected despite her best efforts. She'd seen this before on the streets, the way a body could win the battle against a bullet but lose the war against bacteria. He thrashed against the mattress, his hands reaching out for something that wasn't there. Mihoya, he whispered, his voice cracking. Jiyuya, Taeyang. The babies' names, over and over, threaded through sentences she couldn't comprehend but somehow understood. Promises. Apologies. Fierce, desperate vows of protection from a man who couldn't even protect himself. The babies were crying again. They were always crying. Kendra had figured out the basics, formula stolen from a convenience store 3 blocks away, diapers she'd bought with the last of her money, burping and rocking and the endless cycle of feeding. Every 3 hours, like clockwork. She was running on maybe 6 hours of sleep across 2 days. She changed Taeyang first, then Jiyu, then Miho, assembling them in a row on the blanket like tiny, fragile packages. They were so small. So completely, terrifyingly dependent. If she messed this up, if she forgot to feed them or held them wrong or didn't burp them properly, they would die. It was that simple. The man muttered something else in Korean, his hand clutching at air. Kendra looked at him properly for the first time since that night in the alley. Really looked. His suit was Armani, she'd seen the label when she'd cut it away from his wound. The watch on his wrist could probably feed her for a year. Even his shoes, kicked off and lying in the corner, were the kind of leather that cost more than most people's rent. But here he was. Helpless. Burning with fever. Calling out for his children with the same desperation she'd heard in the voices of every broken person she'd ever met on the streets. Money couldn't save him. Power couldn't save him. All his wealth and whatever authority he commanded in his other life meant nothing in this moment. He was just a man. A father. Dying in a warehouse, dependent on a stranger who had every reason to let him die. Kendra pressed a damp cloth to his forehead and whispered, "I've got them. Your boys are safe." 3 days after the shooting, Hansung sat in what used to be Jae-hyun Kang's office and decided his boss was dead. The chair felt right beneath him. The view from the 63rd floor felt right. The fear in the eyes of the men standing before him felt very right. No body, one of them said carefully. We searched the entire district. Blood trail disappeared near the waterfront. Could have fallen into. He's dead. Hansung cut him off with the kind of certainty that ended arguments. 3 bullets. 1 in the side, 2 in the leg. He was carrying 3 infants. No man survives that. Not even Jae-hyun. The men exchanged glances but said nothing. Hansung had been second in command of the Black Phoenix for 8 years, waiting for this moment with the patience of a predator. He'd been loyal. Useful. Indispensable. And now, finally, the throne was empty. Almost. The children, Hansung said, pulling up a photograph on his tablet. 3 hospital bracelets. 3 names. Born 4 days ago to Jae-hyun's wife, who died in childbirth at a private clinic. Find them. Sir, they're infants. They're not a threat. Hansung's hand slammed on the desk. They are Jae-hyun's blood. They are his legacy. And as long as they exist, they are a threat to everything I'm building. The old guard will rally around them. Use them as puppets. Claim regency until they come of age. He leaned forward. I will not spend the next 18 years looking over my shoulder. He pulled up another image. Security footage from the night of the shooting. Grainy. Dark. But there, a figure in the alley. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone took them, Hansung continued. Someone helped him. Find out who. Check every hospital, every clinic, every street camera within a mile of that alley. And find the shooter. The Zhang family thinks they can make a move on our territory. They think killing Jae-hyun changes the balance of power. He smiled, cold and sharp. Show them what happens when you come at the Black Phoenix. Burn their operations. All of them. Make it loud. Make it brutal. Let every syndicate in this city know that Jae-hyun Kang is dead, and what rises from his ashes is something far more dangerous. The men bowed and left. Hansung turned back to the window, looking out over the city that was now his. Almost. First, he needed to find 3 babies and whoever was stupid enough to hide them. The fever broke on the 4th day. Kendra was singing to Miho, some half-remembered lullaby from a childhood she tried not to think about, when she felt eyes on her. She turned to find the man awake, watching her with the kind of sharp, calculating gaze that made her hand instinctively move toward the knife she kept under her pillow. Who are you? His English was accented but clear, each word measured and controlled despite the weakness in his voice. The person who saved your life. Kendra kept her tone flat, guarded. She'd learned not to show fear. Fear made you pray. His eyes moved past her to the 3 babies arranged on the blanket, then back to her face. Where am I? Safe. For now. She shifted Miho to her other arm. You were shot. Left in an alley with 3 newborns. I brought you here. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Kendra didn't have a good answer. Didn't have any answer that made sense, even to herself. The babies, she said finally. They would have died. Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or suspicion. He tried to sit up and immediately gasped, hand going to his side. Kendra was there before she could think better of it, easing him back down. Don't be stupid. You'll rip the stitches. My sons are fine. Federal changed. Sleeping most of the time when they're not screaming. She picked up Jiyu, who was starting to fuss, and bounced him gently. Hey, little man. You hungry again? Yeah, I know. You're always hungry. Her voice shifted without thinking, soft and musical in a way she hadn't heard from herself in years. She made silly faces at Jiyu, cooing nonsense words while she prepared his bottle. The baby's eyes tracked her movements, his crying fading to curious whimpers. Jae-hyun watched this transformation with an expression she couldn't read. The hard edges in his face softened slightly, and when he spoke again, his voice was different. Quieter. You're good with them. I'm learning. Kdra tested the formula temperature on her wrist. Not like I had a choice. She fed Jiyu in silence, aware of the man's gaze on her the entire time. When the baby finished and let out a satisfied burp, she saw something shift in those calculating eyes. A decision being made. Please, Jaehyun said, and the word sounded like it cost him everything. Let me hold him. Kdra hesitated, then carefully placed Jiyu in his father's arms. They were running out of formula. Kdra counted the remaining bottles twice, hoping the number would somehow change. It didn't. Maybe 2 days left, 3 if she stretched it. The babies were eating more now, growing stronger. She needed to go out. She waited until after midnight, when the streets belonged to people like her, the invisible ones. Pulled her hood up, kept her head down, moved through the shadows like she'd done 1,000 times before. The convenience store on 5th was her usual spot. The night clerk didn't ask questions, didn't look too closely at the homeless girl buying baby supplies. She was 3 blocks from the warehouse, formula and antibiotics for Jaehyun hidden in her backpack, when she saw it. The car moved like a shark through dark water. Black. Expensive. Tinted windows that reflected the streetlights like mirrors. It rolled slowly past the intersection, deliberate and searching, and every instinct Kdra had developed on these streets started screaming. She pressed herself into a doorway, making herself small, invisible. Watched as the car circled the block once, twice. A second car joined it. Then a third. This wasn't the police. Police cars had lights, sirens, patterns she recognized. These vehicles moved with purpose, with coordination. With money. They were looking for something. Someone. Kendra's hand tightened on her backpack strap. The babies. They were looking for the babies. Or for Jaehyun. Or for whoever had been stupid enough to help them. The cars finally moved on, disappearing into the maze of streets that made up the warehouse district. Kdra waited another 20 minutes before she moved, taking a route that added 40 minutes to her journey but kept her away from main roads. When she finally slipped back into the warehouse, she found Jaehyun awake, sitting up despite her orders to stay down. He looked at her face and immediately tensed. What happened? Your people, she said, dumping the supplies on the floor. Black cars. 3 of them. Searching the area. She started shoving their few possessions into bags, her movements sharp and efficient. We need to be ready to move. Not my people. His voice was hard now, all the earlier softness gone. Hansung's people. Who? My second in command. Which means he thinks I'm dead. Jaehyun's jaw clenched. And he's looking for my sons. Kdra stopped packing and looked at him. Really looked. At the expensive suit still crumpled in the corner. At the way he held himself even now, wounded and weak. At the dangerous intelligence in his eyes. Who are you? She asked. Someone, he said quietly, who just made you a target. The wound was healing, but slowly. Kdra changed the dressing while Jaehyun sat rigid, his breathing controlled despite the pain. She'd gotten better at this, steadier hands, cleaner technique. Still, she saw him wince when she pressed the antibiotic-soaked gauze against the healing tissue. She died bringing them into the world, he said suddenly, his voice distant. Min Seo. My wife. Kendra's hands stilled. He'd barely spoken about anything personal in the 6 days since he'd woken up. Now the words came like a dam breaking. The clinic was supposed to be safe. Private. Hidden. But someone talked. Someone always talks when there's enough money involved. His accent thickened with emotion. They came during the delivery. Min Seo was, there were complications. Bleeding. The doctors were trying to save her when the shooting started. Kdra resumed wrapping the bandage, giving him space to continue or stop. Whichever he needed. She made me promise. With her last breath, she made me swear I would get them out. That I would protect them no matter what it cost. His hand clenched into a fist. I carried them through gunfire. Took 3 bullets. Watched my men die covering our escape. And I ended up in an alley, bleeding out, failing the only promise that ever mattered. You didn't fail, Kdrama said quietly. They're alive. You're alive. Because a stranger took pity on us. Not pity. She secured the bandage with tape, not looking at him. I don't do pity. Then what? Kdrama sat back, her jaw tight. The babies were sleeping for once, their soft breathing the only sound beyond the warehouse's settling creaks. She'd spent years not talking about it. Not thinking about it. But something about his raw honesty demanded an answer. I know what it's like, she said finally, when the person who's supposed to protect you is the one you need protecting from. The silence stretched between them, heavy with understanding. How old were you? He asked. 15 when I ran. 20 now. She stood up, gathering the medical supplies. I survived by being invisible. By never trusting anyone. By having one rule, never get involved. You broke your rule. Yeah. She looked at the 3 sleeping babies, then at him. I did. Jae-hyun studied her face with that sharp, calculating gaze that she was beginning to recognize meant he was truly seeing her. Not as a homeless girl. Not as a convenient savior. As a person. Thank you, he said. For breaking your rule. Kdrama nodded once, not trusting herself to speak, and turned away before he could see the tears threatening to fall. The surveillance footage was grainy, but it was enough. Han-sung watched the screen for the 4th time, his eyes narrowing at the figure that appeared in the alley approximately 8 minutes after the shooting. Small. Hooded. Moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew how to survive on the streets. Homeless, one of his men said. Probably just scavenging. Looking for valuables on the body. Then where's the body? Han-sung's finger tapped the desk in a rhythm that made his subordinates nervous. Where are the children? You think a homeless person dragged a 200-pound man and 3 infants away for fun? The men said nothing. Han-sung pulled up another image. A formula bottle. His men had found it 2 blocks from the shooting, discarded in a dumpster. Generic brand. The kind you bought at convenience stores, not the premium organic formula that would have been at the clinic. Someone is keeping those babies alive, he said. Someone who doesn't have money. Someone who's hiding. He zoomed in on the surveillance footage, trying to make out details. The figure's posture. The way they moved. Young, he thought. Female, possibly. Someone who knew the streets well enough to disappear. The warehouse district, Han-sung said suddenly. Every abandoned building within a 2-mile radius of that alley. That's where they are. Sir, that's over 30 buildings. Most are condemned. It'll take days to search them all. Then we don't search. Han-sung stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced precision. We flush them out. Contact our people in the city planning department. I want demolition permits for every condemned structure in that district. And I want sweep teams ready. Tell them we're looking for rival gang members using the buildings as safe houses. You want to demolish. I want them scared. I want them running. And when they run, we'll be waiting. He turned to face his men, his expression cold and certain. Whether it's the Zhang family using those babies as leverage, or some homeless fool who thought they could ransom them back to us, it doesn't matter. No one hides from the Black Phoenix. No one. He pulled up a map of the district, marking each building with red dots. Start with the eastern section. Work west. 3 days. I want this wrapped up in 3 days. He paused, his voice dropping to something dangerous. And when you find whoever's hiding those children, bring them to me. Alive. I want to know exactly who was stupid enough to interfere in our business. The men bowed and left. Han-sung stared at the map, at the maze of streets and forgotten buildings where someone thought they could hide from him. 3 days. That's all they had left. They came at dawn. Kendra heard the vehicles first, multiple engines, cutting through the morning silence like knives. She was on her feet before she was fully awake, instinct overriding exhaustion. Through the cracked window, she saw them. 5 black cars, men in suits pouring out like ants from a disturbed hill. Jae-hyun. Her voice was sharp, urgent. They're here. He was already moving, trying to stand despite the pain etched across his face. Still too weak. Still too slow. The wound had healed enough to keep him alive, but not enough for this. The warehouse door exploded inward with a crash that made the babies scream. Kendra's mind went cold and clear. She'd mapped every inch of this building during her months here, every passage, every weak board, every exit. She grabbed the babies, all 3 bundled into a canvas sling she'd fashioned, and ran. Not toward the exits. Toward the back wall. Stop. A voice echoed through the warehouse. Calm. Authoritative. There's nowhere to run. Give us the children and you live. Kendra knew that voice was lying. She'd heard enough lies in her life to recognize them. She pulled the loose panel she discovered months ago, revealing a crawlspace between walls. Squeezed through with the babies, leaving it slightly ajar. Through the gap, she watched 6 men spread through the warehouse, guns drawn. The man in the center, older, cold-eyed, expensive suit, had to be Han-sung. He approached Jae-hyun slowly, almost casually. "Boss," Han-sung said, and the word dripped with mock respect. "You're alive. What a pleasant surprise." Jae-hyun stood his ground despite swaying slightly. Han-sung. "I should have seen this coming." "You should have. But you got soft. Started a family. Left yourself vulnerable." Han-sung gestured around the warehouse. "And now look at you. Hiding in squalor with some street rat, barely able to stand." Kendra moved through the crawlspace, babies pressed against her chest. She knew exactly where she was going, the old electrical panel, the one that still had live wires running to the sprinkler system she'd been careful never to trigger. "Where are my sons?" Jae-hyun's voice was steady, dangerous. "That's what we're here to find out." Han-sung nodded to his men. "Search every." Kendra yanked the wire. The warehouse erupted. Sprinklers activated throughout the building, alarms blaring, water cascading from the ceiling. In the chaos, she emerged from the wall panel, circled behind Han-sung's men. The old scaffolding she'd been worried about for months, she kicked the support brace. The scaffolding came down like thunder. 2 of Han-sung's men went down under the metal framework, pinned and screaming. The others scattered, disoriented by the water, the noise, the collapsing structure. In that moment of chaos, Jae-hyun moved. He was still weak, still injured, but he was also the man who'd built an empire on violence and will. He took the gun from the nearest man with brutal efficiency, his movements economical despite the pain. 3 shots. 3 men down. Han-sung dove for cover, firing wildly. A bullet sparked off metal near Kendra's head. She ran, babies clutched tight, heading for the loading dock exit she'd always kept clear. Behind her, she heard Jae-hyun's voice, cold and commanding, speaking rapid Korean. Then silence. She stopped at the doorway, breathing hard, and looked back. Jae-hyun stood over Han-sung, gun pointed at his second-in-command's head. The remaining men had their weapons on the ground, hands raised. Water continued to pour from the sprinklers, turning the whole scene into something surreal. "It's over," Jae-hyun said in English, for her benefit. "Call the others. Tell them their boss is alive and Han-sung is finished." One of the men scrambled for his phone. Kendra walked back slowly, baby still bundled against her chest. Miho was crying. Ji-yu and Taeyang had somehow slept through everything. Jae-hyun's eyes found hers across the flooded warehouse. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About who I am." I know who you are. Kendra's voice was steadier than she felt. I figured it out days ago. The suit. The men hunting you. The way you carry yourself even when you're dying. She shifted the babies in her arms. You're the boss. The actual boss. Of the Black Phoenix, he confirmed. The largest criminal organization in Korea. I've ordered deaths. Destroyed lives. Built an empire on fear. He lowered the gun, his expression unreadable. Everything Hansung said about me was true. Except the part about you being soft, Kendra said quietly. Something flickered in his eyes. My wife. Min Seo. She wanted out. Wanted a normal life for our children. I was planning to step down, restructure everything, hand power to someone I trusted. He glanced at Hansung with contempt. Clearly, I chose poorly. More men arrived. These ones bowed to Jae-hyun, relief and fear mixing on their faces. Paramedics. Security. The machinery of power reassembling itself around him. Jae-hyun spoke to them briefly in Korean, then turned back to Kendra. When he did, his voice was different. Vulnerable in a way she recognized. I'm offering you a choice, he said. Walk away now. I'll give you money, set you up somewhere safe. You'll never hear from me again. He paused. Or stay. Help me raise them. Not as an employee. As family. Kendra looked down at the 3 babies. At Miho's tear-stained face. At Jiyu and Taeyong sleeping peacefully despite everything. She'd spent 5 years invisible. 5 years afraid. 5 years convinced that caring about anyone would destroy her. She'd been wrong. I'm staying, she said. Kendra chose family over fear. She chose to protect the helpless instead of protecting only herself. And in doing so, she discovered that the most powerful force in the world isn't money or violence. It's the courage to care when everything tells you not to. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.